The air was thick with smoke and fire as Commander Dane Voss sprinted through the crumbling ruins of Zifar-9. Explosions shook the ground, sending waves of dust into the sky. His dark green eyes scanned the battlefield, searching for survivors. The mission was clear: rescue the last remaining civilians before the enemy bombed the city into oblivion. "Voss, we got hostiles incoming. We need to move," shouted Lieutenant Rowe, a sharp-eyed soldier with cybernetic implants. Dane ignored the warning for now. His gut told him someone was still out there, trapped. His instincts had saved his life too many times to doubt them now. He turned a corner, and there she was. A woman lay slumped against a broken pillar, her silver skin streaked with blood. Long, dark hair spilled over her shoulders, and her violet eyes, though unfocused, burned with a fierce will to live. Even through the chaos, her presence was striking. She wasn't just anyone. Dane recognized the royal insignia on her torn armor. Princess Salara Varen. Dane cursed under his breath. Of all the people left on this dying world, he had just stumbled upon the heir to the Imperium of Varen, one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. She wasn't unconscious, but she was close. Dane knelt beside her, checking the deep wound on her side. Plasma burns. The work of assassins. Her gaze locked onto his. "Who are you?" she rasped. "Commander Dane Voss, Terran Defense Force," he said quickly. "I'm getting you out of here." Solera's fingers tightened weakly around his wrist. "You shouldn't have come for me." "You're welcome," Dane muttered, then lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, but there was no time to dwell on that. The moment he turned, gunfire erupted from the alleyway. Enemy soldiers. Their armor gleamed under the flickering fires of the ruined city. "Stay down." Dane twisted, shielding Solara as he dove for cover. Bullets and plasma bolts tore into the ground around them. Lieutenant Rowe and the other Terran soldiers returned fire, holding the enemy back. "Commander, we're outnumbered," Rowe called. Dane gritted his teeth. There was no turning back now. He had to get Solara to safety. A gunship roared overhead, its spotlight cutting through the darkness. The rescue transport. "We need an exit now," Dane barked. A Terran soldier tossed a smoke grenade, covering their retreat. Dane sprinted through the fog. Solara held tightly against his chest. His muscles burned, but he didn't stop, not until he reached the landing zone. The ship's ramp lowered, and a medic rushed forward. "Commander, put her down here." Dane carefully placed Solara onto the stretcher. She clutched his arm for a brief moment, her eyes sharp despite the pain. "You saved me," she murmured. "Yeah," Dane said. "Try not to get yourself killed before we get you home." The medic pushed him aside to work, but Solara's gaze never left him. As the ship lifted off, Dane exhaled. His mission was complete. Or so he thought. Because the moment they reached the Varen capital, he would learn that saving the princess came with a price. Commander Dane Voss stood at attention inside the Imperial Palace of Varen, his sharp green eyes scanning the towering columns and intricate golden designs covering the massive hall. The palace shimmered under the light of twin suns, its high ceilings filled with floating orbs of soft blue energy. It was unlike anything on Earth, both alien and breathtaking. But Dane wasn't here to admire architecture. He was here because he had saved Princess Solara Varen. At the far end of the hall, the throne loomed high on a raised platform, where King Valkor Varen sat. The ruler of the Imperium was a massive figure, his silver skin marked with deep battle scars. His long black hair was streaked with silver, and his violet eyes burned with intensity. He was a warrior king, feared and respected across the stars. Beside him, Solara stood tall in royal armor, her wound healed by advanced Varenian medicine. She was regal, yet there was something different in her gaze when she looked at Dane. Something unreadable. A royal attendant stepped forward. His voice echoed through the hall. "Commander Dane Voss of the Terran Defense Force, step forward." Dane moved with steady confidence, stopping at the base of the throne. He bowed slightly, just enough to show respect but not submission. King Velker studied him for a long moment. The silence in the room was heavy. Then the king finally spoke, his deep voice filling the chamber. "You saved my daughter's life." Dane met his gaze. "It was my duty, Your Majesty." Velker let out a low hum. "Duty, a concept I understand well." He leaned forward. "You fought off assassins. You carried her to safety. You bled for her. That is not just duty, Commander. That is honor." Dane said nothing. He had no interest in grand speeches. He just wanted to ensure humanity's alliance with the Imperium remained strong. The king's next words, however, changed everything. "In our culture, when a royal life is saved, a bond must be formed in return." Velker's gaze hardened. "You will marry my daughter." Silence crashed over the hall. Dane blinked. "I'm sorry. What?" "You will be Solera's life-mate," the king repeated, his tone absolute. "It is our most sacred tradition." Dane's pulse quickened, but he kept his face neutral. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, I'm a soldier, not a prince. Now, you are both." Solera spoke then, her voice sharp. "Father, this is unnecessary." Velker turned to her. "No, it is law. He saved your life. A bond must be forged." Dane exhaled slowly. This couldn't be happening. He had just done his job. Now he was being asked, no, ordered, to marry a woman he barely knew. Solera crossed her arms, violet eyes flashing. "And what if I refuse?" Velker's expression darkened. "Then you insult our ancestors, and you weaken the Imperium." His gaze returned to Dane. "Do not mistake this as a mere tradition. This union would unite our peoples. Humanity is still new to the galactic stage. With my daughter as your wife, the Terran race would be recognized as equals among the great empires." Dane clenched his jaw. The logic was clear. This was more than just a personal matter. It was political. Still, the idea of marriage. That wasn't something he had ever considered, not for duty, and certainly not for diplomacy. He glanced at Solera. She was beautiful, strong, and intelligent. But she didn't want this any more than he did. "I need time to think," he said finally. Velker nodded. "You have 3 days." Dane turned to leave, his mind spinning. 3 days to decide his fate. But deep down, he already knew, no matter his choice, his life would never be the same. Dane Voss paced inside the lavish guest chamber, his mind racing. The golden walls shimmered with embedded starlight crystals, and soft blue light from the floating orbs above cast a glow over the polished marble floors. Everything about the imperial palace of Varennes screamed wealth, power, and control. But Dane wasn't thinking about the palace's beauty. He was thinking about the insane situation he was in. Marriage. He muttered under his breath. "This is ridiculous." A deep sigh came from behind him. "You're not the only one who thinks that." Dane turned. Princess Solera Varennes stood near the balcony, arms crossed. Her silver skin shimmered under the starlight, and her long black hair cascaded over one shoulder. Dressed in a flowing dark blue robe, she looked every bit the royal heir she was. But her violet eyes were sharp, filled with frustration. Dane exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I take it you're not thrilled about this either." Solera let out a small, humorless laugh. "You think?" She shook her head. "This is outdated. My father is honorable, but he still clings to old traditions." Dane studied her carefully. He had expected arrogance or entitlement from a princess. Instead, she was as trapped in this as he was. She stepped forward. "You're a soldier, Commander. You didn't come here looking for a throne." "No," Dane admitted. "I came here to do my job. Save lives. Keep the peace." He let out a breath. Not to be forced into some galactic political drama. Solera tilted her head. "And yet here we are." Silence hung between them. Dane finally leaned against the edge of a nearby table. So what do we do? Celera hesitated. If we refuse, we risk damaging relations between our people. My father won't go to war over this, but it would be seen as an insult, and humans are still outsiders in the galactic hierarchy. Dane clenched his jaw. That was the truth. Humanity was new to the galactic stage, still viewed as the young species, untested and unproven. If he walked away, Earth could lose a powerful ally. But marrying a woman he barely knew, that was asking a lot. Celera must have read his expression because she sighed again. For what it's worth, I don't expect anything from you. This wouldn't be real. Dane raised an eyebrow. You saying we fake it? She shrugged. We go through with the ceremony. We make it look official. And then we figure out a way to live our lives separately. Dane stared at her. You'd really be okay with that? Celera looked away. I was raised to put my people first. This isn't about me. It's about the Imperium. And for you, it's about humanity's future. Dane exhaled slowly. She was right. Still, something nagged at him. Before he could speak, the doors slid open. Lieutenant Rowe entered, his cybernetic eye scanning the room. His dark brown uniform was crisp, but his usual smirk was missing. Commander, we have a problem. Dane straightened. What kind of problem? Rowe glanced at Celera, then back to Dane. An attack. Someone tried to breach the palace security grid. Assassins. Celera stiffened. Again. Rowe nodded. Looks like someone really doesn't want this wedding to happen. Dane's gut tightened. This wasn't just about politics anymore. This was about survival. He turned to Celera. Looks like we don't have much of a choice now. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, there was no frustration, only understanding. We go through with it, she said. Dane nodded. Then let's make sure we both live to see it. The grand hall of celestial oaths shimmered with golden light as Commander Dane Voss stood at the center, dressed in ceremonial Varanian armor. The silver and black plating fit snugly, designed to symbolize both unity and strength. He wasn't used to such elaborate attire, but today wasn't a normal day. Today, he was marrying Princess Celera Varen. Across from him, Celera stood tall in an elegant dark violet gown, embroidered with silver patterns that resembled constellations. A delicate crown rested on her head, her long black hair flowing down her back. She looked powerful, regal, and just as uncomfortable as he felt. The hall was filled with thousands of Varanian nobles, high-ranking military officers, and Terran diplomats. It was a political spectacle, one that neither Dane nor Celera had chosen, yet here they were. At the front of the hall, King Velker stood beside the High Priestess, his expression unreadable. He raised a hand, silencing the murmuring crowd. Today, we witnessed the binding of two warriors, the king announced. One of our own, and one from the Terran race. Two souls united in honor, duty, and destiny. Dane glanced at Celera. Her violet eyes met his, steady but unreadable. They had agreed to go through with this, but it still felt unreal. The High Priestess stepped forward, holding an ancient-looking blade. Blood and bond, she said solemnly. By this right, your fates are woven together. Dane and Celera each took the blade, slicing a shallow line across their palms before pressing them together. The Varanian marriage ritual was symbolic of shared strength and sacrifice, but all Dane could focus on was the warmth of Celera's hand against his. The priestess nodded. The bond is sealed. The hall erupted in cheers. Dane exhaled, shoulders tensing as he prepared for the next part, the final vow. But before he could speak, the air exploded with a deafening blast. The stained glass ceiling shattered, sending shards raining down. The crowd screamed as armed figures in dark armor descended from the rafters, weapons drawn. Assassins. Dane's instincts kicked in. He grabbed Celera and pulled her behind him as plasma bolts ripped through the hall. Guards rushed forward, engaging the attackers. The Varenian nobles fled in terror, while King Valkyr drew his own blade, cutting down an assassin who got too close. Dane grabbed a fallen soldier's weapon and fired at the nearest enemy. One went down, but more were coming. Too many. Valera tore off part of her ceremonial gown, revealing a combat suit underneath. She grabbed a fallen warrior's blade, eyes blazing. "We need to move." Dane nodded. "Stay close." They sprinted toward the hall's exit, dodging enemy fire. A plasma bolt barely missed Dane's shoulder, burning through part of his armor. He gritted his teeth, returning fire. Lieutenant Rowe appeared from the chaos, dual pistols in hand. "Commander, we've got enemy forces trying to breach the palace gates." Dane cursed. This wasn't just a random attack. Someone had planned this for months. Celera blocked a strike from an assassin, spinning and taking them down with one clean slice. Her breathing was steady, but Dane could see the fire in her eyes. "We need to get to the command center," she said. "If they shut down the palace shields, they'll bring an entire invasion force inside." Dane nodded. "Then let's end this." Side by side, they charged into battle. Whatever doubts they had before were gone. Survival came first. And whether they liked it or not, they were in this together. Blaster fire filled the air as Dane Voss and Princess Stelera raced down the palace corridor. The once beautiful halls were now battlefields, with guards fighting off the invading assassins. Smoke and energy sparks crackled from damaged walls, and the scent of burnt metal filled the air. Dane turned, firing his plasma rifle at an attacker. The bolt struck the enemy's chest, sending them crashing to the floor. He reloaded quickly, scanning for more threats. Celera moved beside him, her curved blade slicing through another assassin. She was fast, faster than any human could be. Her violet eyes burned with focus as she fought, her every move precise and deadly. Lieutenant Rowe appeared from another hallway, still holding his dual pistols. "Commander, the enemy is trying to disable the palace's defense systems. If they succeed, they'll drop the shields and let their fleet inside." Dane's grip on his weapon tightened. "Where's the control room?" Celera pointed ahead, just beyond the war chambers. "But it's heavily guarded." Dane smirked. "Then we'd better break through." The three of them moved fast, cutting through groups of assassins as they advanced. Dane covered their backs, taking down enemies with quick, precise shots. Celera led the charge, moving like a warrior born for battle. They reached the war chambers, but the moment they entered, an explosion shook the palace. The walls trembled, and a nearby pillar collapsed, forcing them to dive for cover. Dane coughed through the dust, pushing himself up. "Status." Rowe groaned. "Still alive." Celera stood, shaking off debris. "We have to move. Now." Through the smoke, figures emerged, heavily armored warriors with glowing red visors. The real enemy had arrived. Dane clenched his jaw. Great, elite enforcers. These weren't just assassins. These were professional killers, trained to take down high-value targets. The leader stepped forward, voice distorted by a helmet modulator. "Surrender the princess, and we will spare your lives." Dane aimed his rifle. "Yeah, that's not happening." Celera tightened her grip on her blade. "You want me?" She took a step forward, her expression hard. "Come and get me." The battle erupted in an instant. Dane dodged a plasma bolt, rolling to the side and firing at an enforcer's weak spot, the joints in their armor. The shot hit, making the enemy stumble. Celera engaged another, her blade meeting their energy shield in a flash of sparks. Rowe leaped onto a fallen pillar, dual-wielding his pistols as he fired rapidly, taking out two more enforcers. They just don't stop coming. Dane gritted his teeth. They needed to end this fast. He spotted a power conduit behind the enforcers, a weakness. "Celera, can you overload that conduit?" he shouted. She followed his gaze and nodded. "Cover me." Dane and Rowe unleashed covering fire as Celera dashed forward, dodging enemy attacks with incredible speed. She reached the conduit, plunged her blade into it, and sent a surge of energy blasting through the room. The enforcers short-circuited, their armor locking up before they collapsed, disabled. Dane exhaled. "Nice work." Solera smirked. "You doubted me." Before he could answer, an alarm blared through the palace. Ro checked his wrist scanner. His expression darkened. "The shields are failing. We need to get to the control room now." Dane nodded, gripping his rifle. "Then let's finish this." Side by side, they ran toward their next battle, knowing the fate of the palace, and possibly the galaxy, rested in their hands. Dane Voss sprinted through the burning corridors of the Imperial Palace, his plasma rifle clenched in his hands. The ground trembled as another explosion shook the structure, sending cracks through the golden walls. Smoke filled the air, and distant screams echoed through the halls. Beside him, Princess Solera Varen kept pace, her dark violet combat suit smeared with dust and battle scars. Her curved blade was still glowing from the last fight, her violet eyes sharp and unwavering. Behind them, Lieutenant Ro checked his wrist scanner. "The shields are at 23% and dropping fast. If they go down completely, the enemy fleet will land right on top of us." Dane gritted his teeth. They had to get to the control room before it was too late. They turned a corner and ran straight into a squad of enemy soldiers. The Varenian traders, dressed in black combat armor, raised their weapons the second they saw them. "Down!" Dane shouted, diving behind a fallen pillar as plasma fire filled the hallway. Solera ducked, pressing her back against the wall. She exchanged a look with Dane. "We don't have time for this." Dane smirked. "Then let's end it fast." Before the enemy could react, Solera leaped forward, moving like a shadow. Her curved blade flashed, slicing through the first soldier's weapon before he could fire. She spun, kicking another straight into the wall, knocking him out cold. Dane emerged from cover, firing 3 precise shots, each bolt hitting its target. The last 2 soldiers fell before they could even react. Ro stepped over one of the unconscious bodies. "I swear, you two were born for this." Solera wiped her blade. Less talking, more running. They pressed forward, reaching the control room doors. But before they could enter, a new voice echoed through the hallway. "Going somewhere." Dane turned sharply, raising his rifle. At the end of the hall stood a figure in crimson armor. Commander Valric, one of the Imperium's most feared warriors. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his cybernetic eye glowed with a cold red light. Dane immediately knew this wouldn't be an easy fight. Valric smirked. "Surrender the princess, and I might let you live." Solera stepped forward, chin high. "I will never surrender." Valric sighed. "Then you leave me no choice." In an instant, he lunged forward, moving faster than any normal soldier. Dane barely dodged in time as Valric's energy sword slashed through the air, slicing a deep mark into the wall. Solera met his next attack, blocking with her blade. Sparks flew as metal clashed against metal. She gritted her teeth, muscles straining as she held him off. Dane fired his rifle, but Valric deflected the shot with his sword, sending the plasma bolt ricocheting into the ceiling. He was dangerous. Ro fired from the side, trying to distract him, but Valric moved like a phantom, dodging every attack. Then, with a single powerful swing, he knocked Solera back. She hit the ground hard, gasping for breath. Dane saw red. He charged forward, slamming his rifle into Valric's chest. The impact made the enemy commander stumble, but not for long. Valric grabbed Dane by the throat, lifting him off the ground. "You're strong," Valric said, "but not strong enough." Dane struggled, his vision blurring. He could feel the air being crushed from his lungs. But before Valric could finish him, Solera struck. She plunged her blade straight into Valric's side. The enemy commander gasped, releasing Dane as he staggered back. Solera didn't hesitate. She grabbed Dane's arm, and pulled him toward the control room. "Move!" Ro threw a smoke grenade, covering their escape. As they rushed inside, Dane gasped for air, his throat burning. Celera touched his arm. "Are you?" "I'm fine," he rasped, shaking off the pain. He looked at the control panel. "Now let's save this damn palace." Celera nodded, her expression determined. The final battle was just beginning. Dane Voss pressed a hand to his throat, still feeling the pain from Valric's crushing grip. He forced himself to breathe through it. There was no time to recover. The control room was their last chance to save the palace, and possibly the entire planet. The massive room hummed with energy, glowing control panels surrounding a central holo display of the palace's defense grid. The shields were dangerously low. Only 9% power remained. If they failed completely, the enemy fleet would land, and the battle would be lost. Celera rushed to the main console, fingers flying over the controls. "The system is locked. The attackers must have planted a virus." Lieutenant Rowe cursed as he scanned the room. "Then we have to manually override it. We need to reach the power core." Dane's jaw tightened. "Where?" Celera pointed to a secured door across the room. "Behind there." But before she could finish, the door blasted open. From the smoke, Valric stepped inside. His armor was damaged, sparks flickering from the wounds Celera had given him. But he was still standing. Behind him, more enemy soldiers poured into the room. Celera grabbed her blade, stepping in front of Dane. "I'll handle him." Dane's grip tightened on his rifle. "We do this together." Valric's cybernetic eye glowed as he lifted his energy sword. "You will all die here." The battle erupted. Celera lunged, her curved blade clashing against Valric's. Sparks flew as they traded fierce blows. She was fast, but he was stronger. Dane covered her, firing at enemy soldiers, each shot hitting its mark. He moved with precision, taking down 1, 2, 3 enemies before they could reach the console. Rowe fought beside him, dual pistols blazing. "There's too many." Dane gritted his teeth. He had to end this fast. He turned to Celera, who was still locked in combat with Valric. She was holding her own, but barely. Dane saw an opening. He raised his rifle, aiming directly at Valric's exposed side. He fired. The plasma bolt hit its mark, burning through Valric's armor. The enemy commander staggered, growling in pain. Celera didn't hesitate. With a final fierce strike, she slashed across his chest, sending Valric crashing to the ground. For a moment, everything was still. Then, Valric's red cybernetic eye flickered and went dark. He was finished. Dane exhaled, lowering his rifle. "It's over." But Rowe shouted, "No, it's not." Dane turned, just in time to see an enemy soldier reaching for the console, preparing to shut the shields down for good. Dane fired first. The shot hit the soldier square in the chest, sending him collapsing against the controls. A sudden surge of power hummed through the room. Celera's eyes widened as the holo display flickered to life. That was it. The power core is reactivating. Dane ran to the console, scanning the data. The shields were rising again. 15%, 30%, 70%. Then 100%. The palace's defense grid flashed back online, sealing the atmosphere in an impenetrable energy dome. Outside, the enemy fleet, which had been preparing for a full invasion, crashed into the shield barrier, their ships unable to breach the defenses. They had won. Dane exhaled, finally allowing himself to relax. He turned to Celera, who was breathing hard but victorious. She met his gaze, a small smirk forming. "Not bad for a human." Dane chuckled. "Not bad for a princess." Rowe groaned, holstering his pistols. "If you two are done flirting, let's make sure no one else tries to kill us today." Celera sheathed her blade. "Agreed." Dane looked at the fallen body of Valric. The battle was over, but something told him this war was just beginning. For now, though, They had survived. And that was enough. The battlefield was silent. Dane Voss stood in the ruined control room, his rifle lowered, his breathing steady despite the battle that had just ended. Smoke still lingered in the air, the scent of burned metal mixing with the distant hum of the palace's restored energy shield. Beside him, Princess Talera Varen gazed at the glowing holo display. The shield was holding. The enemy fleet, once ready to invade, was now retreating into the void. Their plan had failed. Lieutenant Rowe exhaled, stretching his arms. So, we actually did it. Dane gave a tired chuckle. Yeah, we did. Solera's violet eyes softened as she turned to Dane. You saved my people, my home, and me. Dane shrugged, brushing a hand over his dark, battle-scarred jacket. All in a day's work. Rowe smirked. I hope you realize that means the king still expects you to marry her. Dane froze. Oh, right. Solera blinked, suddenly reminded of the royal decree, the one that had started all of this. The king had ordered that whoever saved the princess's life must marry her, and Dane, well, he had done that more than once. An awkward silence stretched between them. Solera finally spoke. You don't have to, you know. Dane turned to her, raising an eyebrow. Don't have to what? She crossed her arms, a hint of amusement in her expression. Marry me. I'll tell my father that you've earned the right to choose. Dane hesitated. And what if I choose to leave? For the first time, Solera's confidence faltered. She looked away, her fingers brushing the hilt of her blade. Then, you are free to go. Dane studied her. She wasn't just saying it. She meant it. He had fought wars, survived impossible odds. But standing here, looking at Solera, he felt something different. She wasn't just a princess. She was a warrior, a survivor. And after everything, he realized he didn't want to leave. Dane took a slow step forward. And if I choose to stay? Solera met his gaze, searching his face for any sign of deception. She found none. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. Then, we will find our own path forward. Rowe groaned. Great. More flirting. Dane laughed, shaking his head. Let's get out of here first. Then we can talk about the future. Solera nodded. Agreed. The three of them stepped out onto the grand balcony of the palace, overlooking the capital city below. The streets were filled with people cheering. The war was over. The people were free. Dane had arrived on this planet as an outsider, a simple soldier caught in someone else's war. But now he was something more. Maybe a hero. Maybe a legend. Or maybe, just maybe, something greater still. For the first time in years, Dane Voss wasn't running from a battle. He was standing exactly where he was meant to be. And the future was his to decide. The Varanian palace stood tall against the night sky, its golden towers reflecting the twin moons above. The sounds of celebration still echoed through the capital city below. Cheers, music, and the ringing of victory. But inside the palace, Dane Voss couldn't rest. He stood alone on the royal balcony, his arms crossed as he watched the stars beyond the planet's protective shield. The battle was over, but his mind refused to be at peace. Can't sleep either. Dane turned to see Princess Solera stepping beside him. She had changed into a flowing black and silver robe, but even now, she still carried her curved blade at her hip, a warrior to the core. Dane smirked. Didn't expect royalty to have trouble sleeping. Solera raised an eyebrow. Didn't expect a human soldier to refuse a royal bed. Dane chuckled, shaking his head. Guess I'm still wired from the fight. A comfortable silence settled between them as they both gazed out into the vastness of space. Then Solera spoke softly. The war may be over, but danger still lingers. Dane glanced at her. You think they'll come back? Her expression darkened. Not just them. Others will come. The Imperium was powerful, but they weren't the only ones watching. Now that Varen has survived their invasion, other empires will see us as a threat, or as a prize. Dane sighed, running a hand through his dark, battle-worn hair. And here I thought I could finally relax. Solara gave a small smirk. You can leave if you want, Dane. No one would blame you. Dane studied her carefully. There was no accusation in her voice, only a genuine offer. But deep down, he already knew his answer. I think I'll stick around, he said, leaning on the railing. Someone's got to watch your back. Solara tilted her head. To protect the princess. Dane smirked. To protect a friend. For the first time, she looked relieved. Not as a princess, not as a leader, but as a person who had fought and lost too much. Then, her usual confidence returned. Well, if you're staying, you'll need a proper role in the kingdom. Dane chuckled. Got any jobs that don't involve wearing fancy robes? Solara tapped her chin in mock thought. How about commander of the royal guard? Dane raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? She met his gaze, her violet eyes steady. You're the only one I trust. Dane exhaled, considering her words. A warrior's life wasn't easy. There would always be another fight, another enemy. But for once, he wasn't fighting alone. He extended his hand. Then it's a deal. Solara clasped it firmly. A warrior's promise. As they stood under the twin moons of Voren, Dane realized his journey wasn't ending. It was just beginning.